255,700. 255,700. That is the number of people who've died from COVID 19 in the United States as of this morning. Most statisticians would tell us that's an undercount. 255,700. So many lives lost. And that doesn't even begin to take into account the lingering side effects of the illness that so many are still experiencing after they recover. It doesn't take into account the lost jobs and professional identities and professional communities. It doesn't take into account the months of schooling that have been lost to kids and other students, the learning communities that are so fractured right now. It doesn't take into account the relationships with our friends and families that are being just barely glued together through phone and text and FaceTime and church Zoom like this. It doesn't take into account the loss of the simple joys of breaking bread and dancing together, the simple gifts of singing together, holding hands, hugging. It doesn't take into account the loss of quiet for all families with children and the loss of joyous cacophony for all small households of adults who don't get to have people over anymore. And it doesn't take into account the loss of our rituals of celebration and of mourning, our weddings and parties, our holidays that have been canceled or postponed, our funerals and memorial services. So much has been lost in this time. And so as we enter this week of the holiday of Thanksgiving, this week when so many of us turn our attention to what it means to give thanks, with so much lost, is there gratitude to be found? Dr. Eddie Glaude, who's the chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton, wrote an article in Time magazine on November 7th, where he said, so many people have died from COVID-19, and they're predicting that by New Year's Day, that number will go from 255 to 340,000, maybe more. So many have died. And he writes, many will have died alone. Loved ones would have had to say goodbye via smartphone and figure out how to grieve without the collective rituals of mourning and loss, without funerals where we are together. He talks about how our politicians have wanted to hide the dead from our view and how we have followed their lead. That death has remained hidden like those modern cemeteries that are out on the outskirts of town rather than in the town center. He says today the dead from coronavirus is principally a private affair, where a sense of shared suffering is fleeting at best. With the virus, the death has shown us our disunion. And he finishes by saying that we have to understand that we are going to need to figure out how to be together differently after this pandemic is over. We will have to be together. We will have to make amends to the dead, or they will haunt us as a nation. We will have to make something meaningful of the scale of this loss, or it will run our nation into the ground. I hadn't thought very much about how hidden the death has been and how lonely the death has been from this pandemic until I read Dr. Glaud's words. When I was a kid, the church that I grew up in was one of these old New England churches right on the town green. And even though the building was new, there was an ancient cemetery behind the church. And every year we would have our Easter egg hunt in the cemetery. They would hide all the eggs in the cemetery. And I don't know if they made that decision because that was just the biggest space for kids to run around in on the church grounds, or if they were trying to make some sort of theological point with having the Easter egg hunt in the graveyard. But I do know that it was part of how I got to know what death meant as a child. Because in the hours that we would spend looking for Easter eggs and really just in playing in the graveyard while our parents were talking during coffee hour, I would read some of the graves and think about what life might have been like back then. Hold on, I'm going to raise my volume. Okay. Think about what life would have been like in the 16 and 17 and 1800s, the early 1900s, when some people inexplicably lived long lives until their 80s or 90s. And yet most people died young. Children died as babies or before their 10th birthday. So many young women died in childbirth. So many young men died in war. The cemeteries used to be right in the center of town, right in the center of our lives, along with memorials like war memorials. And that has all been shifted in the way that we plan our lives, our cities these days. And it's been really lost in this time of the pandemic. I think about Dr. Glaud's words about how we will need to find new meaning for the scope of this massive loss we are experiencing, how we are going to need to memorialize this time in order to make meaning from it, or it will corrode the fabric of our society. This is part of why we honor the Trans Day of Remembrance and Resilience every year. It is one of these acts of honoring lives that have been lost and honoring the resilience in the community that is still here. And maybe more than any of that, honoring the value that is brought into the entire fabric of our community by the trans and non-binary community. We do these memorials so that we can remember, so that we can give thanks for things that we have lost, and so we can honor the place of that which is gone in the continued living of our lives. And so while I've been thinking about how we can possibly make meaning from the scale of the loss that we are experiencing from COVID, I've come back to this idea of gratitude. This gratitude which is so hard to find these days, and yet which is so central to the process of memorializing. If you think about every time we do a funeral and memorial service together, so much of it is about giving thanks for the person who we have lost and reflecting on the ways that they have transformed our lives and therefore continue to live on through us. This is a huge part of what is going to allow us to make any kind of meaning from the incredible loss that we are experiencing right now, is actually gratitude. Gratitude. Author Diana Butler Bass wrote an article this week called "The Year of No Thanks." And she quotes Albert Schweitzer in it, that theologian and Nobel Peace Prize winner who wrote about a century ago, he wrote, "The greatest thing is to give thanks for everything. He who has learned this knows what it means to live. He has penetrated the whole mystery of life, giving thanks for everything." And though there is wisdom in what Albert Schweitzer said, she also lifts up the Christian scriptures that he sort of cribbed that idea from. So it's the First Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18, which say, "Rejoice always and pray without ceasing. Give thanks in all circumstances." But she lifts up the important difference between what Albert Schweitzer said and what is in those scriptures when he said, the greatest thing is to give thanks for everything. And in the scriptures it says, give thanks in all circumstances. The important difference for Diana Butler Bass and for me is that you don't always want to give thanks for everything, right? She writes, gratitude is not about giving thanks for anything that is evil or unjust, never for violence or lying or oppression, never for illness, hunger, or abuse. Do not be grateful for these things, she writes. The scripture says give thanks in all circumstances. And that word in Greek that we translate as give thanks in all circumstances could also mean within or throughout. Give thanks throughout all circumstances. She says it locates us in the here and now, but also in the past, in the future, in happiness, in despair, in all things. I'm not grateful for COVID, she writes, but through these days I've been reminded of the fragile gift of life, treasuring what I have often taken for granted. I'm not grateful for political corruption, she writes, but through it, I've come to value democracy and activism more than ever before. I'm not grateful for economic distress, she writes, but through it, I've remembered how we can live more simply and with more generosity and fairness. None of us should be thankful for this terrible year, she writes. But if we stop and reflect, we see that we can be thankful through it. 2020 needn't have the final word and steal from us the possibility of thanks and joy. 2020 need not have the final word, my friends. We can be thankful through it, if not for it. I've been thinking about how to be grateful not for the loss itself, but like we do in memorial services, to be grateful for the thing that existed before it was lost. Not to be grateful for the loss itself, but to be grateful through the loss, to be grateful for what I have gained and continues to live through me even though the loss has happened. Grateful in the ways that gifts and lessons from that which have been lost are folded into my day-to-day experience and highlighting for me how I need to live out those gifts and lessons even more. The poet William Stafford, in his poem, The Way It Is, writes, "There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer or get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread." I think of the gratitude through all circumstances like this thread that each one of us follows. It is finding a way to adopt a posture of gratitude, a position of gratitude that we always hold no matter what is happening, even when what is happening to us we are not grateful for at all. We carry that thread among things that change, but the thread does not change. So as we enter Thanksgiving week, with so much lost, there is gratitude to be found. And so I want to invite you to take a moment and think about something that you are grateful through right now, circumstances through which you are grateful. And if you feel moved, to type them into the chat. I'll just read a handful of them. Not what we're grateful for, what we are grateful through. Grateful through the journey, grateful through separation from family, grateful through grief, grateful through isolation, grateful through separation from friends, through cancer, through our democratic process. Grateful to be of service through being a physician, grateful through granddaughters going back to school, grateful through healing, through divorce and separation, through confusion, through disability, through illness, through the election. Yeah. Grateful through getting sober, through despair, through the front lines of the pandemic, through America, through loss of relationships, through friends that keep in touch. We need not be grateful for everything. It's not about giving thanks for things that are evil or unjust. It's not about violence or lying or oppression or suffering. Never gratitude for illness or hunger or abuse. Instead, being grateful in all circumstances, through all circumstances, for all that we learn from that which we have lost, for all that we continue to live out, even though someone we love or something that has been important is gone. $255,700 people just as of this morning, and numbers are rising. We have lost so many, my friends. We have lost members of this community and many loved ones in our wider circle of community. And we are not at the end yet. We will need to be able to make meaning from this scale of loss, or we will fall apart. And so as we enter this Thanksgiving week, this complicated week that's complicated even in the best of years, may each one of us find ways to be grateful through what we are experiencing, through what is lost. May we find ways of being grateful for the new ways of being together and doing things together, for the ability to do Thanksgiving Zoom pie together. May we be grateful for the sense of resilience we feel, or at least maybe the ability to survive something that most of us would have said was unimaginable just a year ago. May we give thanks for our interdependence with everyone in the world, for none of us is alone in what we are going through. May we be grateful not for what is happening, but through it. Amen, and blessed be.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, And you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.